Hello and welcome to Obscure Movie Reviews, where we love to take a look at some of the more unknown and ambiguous titles in cinema history. Here we focus on movies that are hard to find, on the older side, relatively unknown, or perhaps they simply lack in popularity. So get your down payment ready and check your credit score as we take a faith-filled journey with Flywheel. When Jay Austen's used car lot is struggling financially, he makes the risky decision to devote his life and his business to God. He changes the way he operates and decides that he's willing to take less money if it means being an honest and honorable man. Flywheel is the first and most overlooked film in the series of Christian movies made by Sherwood Pictures, who also brought other Christian classics like Fireproof, Facing the Giants, and Courageous. Being their first foray into filmmaking, the inexperienced crew sets out with a meager budget to tell a story about how God can change lives. How'd they do? Well, let's take a look. Those involved in this movie would definitely agree that there isn't an actor or actress in the bunch. Essentially, every cast member was brand new to acting, though many of them would go on to act in other productions later. But for stars Alex Kendrick and Janet Lee Dapper, this was brand new for them. This is one area the movie suffers in, but strangely enough, not as much as you might initially think. While the acting is weak in areas, forced in areas, and basically non-existent in other areas, there's still something real that keeps it engaging. What is so strange is that many of these performers would go on later to give really solid performances in other films. But at this stage in any of their careers, it's lacking. The most convincing parts of the film actually come out when people are praying. This can probably be attributed to the fact that the film was meant to be used as a local ministry, and the people involved were practitioners of their faith. Ultimately, despite some of the performances having a level of intrigue at times, it'll arrive at a 3 out of 10 because the acting's not very good. With a 2-hour runtime and poor acting, you might think that this film would be a bit of a drag to watch. That actually turns out not to be true. You're introduced to the main characters quickly, the problems are laid out well, and the story keeps moving along at a steady pace. One of the things that the Kendrick brothers and Sherwood Pictures does best is storytelling, and part of that comes with the timing of their stories. This film is never too slow and never too long. The pace is only really noticed at all because of some of the shortcomings of the cinematography, which we'll get into next. Flywheel will arrive at a 9 out of 10 for being very well paced. Flywheel was directed by Alex Kendrick, who also starred in and co-wrote the film. Mr. Kendrick is first and foremost a pastor and not a trained filmmaker, and he has said as much. Cinematography is where this film suffers the most. It has a poor home movie quality in terms of the visual style. They were using only a single camera and had a budget of just $20,000. While I'd love to cut them some slack in this area, I know from my own filmmaking experience that the camera and the budget are secondary to the person behind the camera. In this case, that was Alex Kendrick and Tracy Good, who also starred as Bernie in the film. Again, this was their first film, and unfortunately, it shows. I had to make myself get past the cinematography the first time I watched it. They'll get a 1 out of 10. The music was composed by Heather Spencer, and this would be her only film credit to date. The music isn't bad, it's just kind of forgettable. It isn't very interesting and sounds a lot like the stock music you might hear in an old after-school special. Given the film itself, that might be kind of appropriate, but it's also underwhelming. Top that off with rough audio quality, again, owed to the lack of experience on the production team's part, and you end up with an unimpressive soundtrack. It'll get a 3 out of 10 for not being very good. While it may seem like I've been needlessly harsh to a film made by non-filmmakers with the intent of evangelism and not major motion picture aspirations, this is where that all changes. The story was what kept me engaged. Despite struggling at first with the acting, cinematography, and sound design, I found the story particularly interesting. Now, I must admit that not everyone will. As a practicing Christian and former car salesman, there was a lot that I could relate to in the story. While it does deal with concerns of a spiritual nature, the story is very down to earth. There's even something that could be said about the dangers of listening to slander and what good publicity can do for someone. But ultimately, it's the journey that Jay Austen goes through that is most appealing. Once he resolves to make a godly change in his life, Jay is met with crisis after crisis. But through his faith, he pulls through and ultimately finds his joy again. It's a feel-good Christian story that many Christians can easily connect with. However, not everyone will connect with it, to be sure. Though I think even the strongest cynic would have to admit that it's at least an average story, even if they don't engage with it on a personal level. So we'll settle at a 7 out of 10, because if nothing else, it's a good story. This is very tricky to gauge. On the one hand, hardcore practicing Christians will likely say that this is a must-watch and therefore a must-rewatch kind of film, whereas others will likely say that if they saw it once, they need not ever watch it again. I myself have watched it multiple times and enjoyed it multiple times, but it does lend itself to my criticism every time due to the amateur quality of it. Being that there is a large audience that will definitely want to rewatch it, but the general public likely will not, we'll give it a 4 out of 10 for having below average rewatchability. Personally, I really enjoyed this movie, but it took me about a half hour to start enjoying it. That's about how long it took me to stop being a critic and start following the plot. Now I'm able to watch it knowing that I'm going in for the story and not much else. There are several moments in the film that are very heartwarming, and some genuinely funny moments too.
You better give me an apology.
Well, that's why.
Don't you talk back to me. I'm tired of the lies, the deceit, the confections, and everything else.
The confection.
Don't you sass me.
But a lot of that has to do with being able to relate to it on a personal level. For me, the story and the pacing tip the scale and make it a 7 out of 10, and a good film. That will give Flywheel a 4.86 out of 10, making it essentially an average film but leaning toward below average. It will surely rank higher among Christian circles, but I think that this is an overall fair assessment. Thanks everyone for checking out that obscure movie review. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you can be up to date on our latest content. Make sure to check out some of the other content on the channel as well. Have a good one.